Welcome back to the Comics Cube, everyone. I am back with Dana Simpson, who is making her third appearance on the show.
Hi,
Dana, how are you?
I'm as well as can be expected, and then some.
Okay, that's the best we can do in the state of the world today. Uh,
Yeah,
uh,
the larger world may be on fire, but in my own personal life, things are all right.
that's great. That's great to
Which is
hear.
how things have been for me a lot in the last 10 years or so.
Well, the last time we spoke was, I think, 2 or 3 years ago. When it was that Phoebe turned 10,
Yeah.
and
And
when you were on the show that time, you came up with a story idea right in the middle of the show. And let's see if that happens again today.
yeah, I believe that made its way into the strip too.
For those who are unaware, the last time I spoke to Dana, Phoebe and Her Unicorn was turning 10, and Phoebe was perpetually 9. And that's when you realized that for the 10th anniversary, Phoebe should have her 10th birthday.
Yeah, and I did it, and then her Phoebe's 10th birthday was it was an opportunity to trot out every incidental character we hadn't seen in a while and have them show up, and it was a nice time. So thank you for that. We'll see if inspiration strikes again. For all of you out there, I'm extremely easily influenced.
And so that was a few years ago. Phoebe and Her Unicorn turned 10 years old. But this year, on the 30th of March, Phoebe and Her Unicorn turned 10 years old in syndication
Yes, it did. And also ended as a daily strip.
and ended as a daily strip.
I'm still
So
do I'm continuing the Sundays.
you are continuing the Sundays and you are transitioning otherwise almost completely into graphic novels,
Into
which,
graphic novels. The first thing I always stress when I talk to people about it is Phoebe and Marigold are not going anywhere. They are going, their adventures will continue. If you mainly consume my work through books, you might not even notice. And that was sort of what led me there in the first place. Like the fact that most people who consume the strip. That's such a terrible way of putting it. Most
yeah,
people who let's say read, that seems neutral,
yeah.
do so through books. Like it's a moderately successful syndicated strip and a hugely successful book series with basically the same material. And I sort of felt like that was fine for as long as I felt like doing it in strip form. But as time went on, my ideas sort of got longer. I sort of felt like having to do it as a strip every day and meet those deadlines rather than devote myself to creating something longer was holding me back a bit. I've done two books that were graphic novels. Book six, The Magic Storm, and book eight, Unicorn Theater, are both standalone graphic novels. Well, not standalone you know what I mean. They
Yeah.
are graphic novels as opposed to collections of strips. And so they are that's something that publisher has wanted from me for a while, more of that. And I meeting the daily deadlines and haven't had the time to do it, but I really, really want to. I have so many ideas.
What
That
has
ramble was by way of explanation, but yeah. TLDR, the time is right to just write Phoebe and Marigold books.
Yeah, you've said you've known this was coming for a while.
Yeah, ever since the books really took off, I've sort of felt like that was the eventual fate of the strip, to just become a series of graphic novels, because that's what it seemed to be to most people. I
Yeah.
meet kids, and I mean, let's face it, newspapers have been in a better place than they are now. They've been sort of in decline for a long time. I don't like that any more than the rest of you, but it is what it is. And meanwhile, graphic novels for kids and middle grade readers have just exploded.
Oh,
I
I,
feel
I
like,
keep hearing comics are dying.
yeah, I have a bit of a rant about that, and I won't deliver all of it to you. I'll just say that I think people are reluctant to say comics are doing fine. They're just for girls now. I mean, and not only for girls, but like girls are inside the clubhouse. And I think the median comics reader now is like a 12-year-old girl
Ooh,
who probably likes manga. So it's a different world.
it's probably true. It's probably true because so this is a thing. I went to Singapore a few years ago to meet an old friend, and I she had a daughter who I think at that point was 4 years old, and I was like, what do I give? What do I give them? Because it is Filipino custom to give gifts to people who you visit.
Hmm.
And so for her daughter, I got uh the first volume of Phoebe and Her Unicorn,
Oh, thank you.
and I was talking to her about it because recently, and she was like, "Oh yeah, we're on book 6 now." So
Yeah, thank you for that.
yeah, so
And that's my typical reader. They're young, a lot of them are girls, and they start at book one, and then the next time I see them, they're on book 10 or whatever. It's fun.
it's great.
Kids are the best audience. I always say that because like they're just so joyful about stuff they love.
Yeah, and they're not looking to save the world or something with their next book. You know, the next
Yeah,
book they read.
and they're also like they're not they're not scanning for flaws the way adults are. We cast a much more critical eye to stuff, and in some ways that's a virtue, but I do think we lose something that kids have when they read something and they like it, and there's just a pure love that they have for it, untainted by cynicism.
Yes. What looking back on the last decade of Phoebe and Her Unicorn in newspaper strips, what would you say the most rewarding part has been?
The most rewarding part, oh, there's so many. I don't think it's number one, but high on the list has been getting to meet so many of my comics heroes. Like as I got to enter the clubhouse of syndicated cartoonists, suddenly these people that have just been names to me for so long since I was a kid are just here, and I'm just among them, and that's been such a gigantic privilege and honor. You know, I want to go back and tell young me that it actually works out that way. It was and is exciting, especially finding that a lot of them are really awesome people.
Yeah.
I say that's probably not number one, only because number one really just has to be the readers. I know that's a fairly stock answer to give, but it's absolutely true. You know, doing the strip every day and having readers tell me that having the characters there every day is comforting for them, or that it's something that they look forward to. Just being part of people's day. That's the greatest thing about like daily syndicated strips. You're not necessarily there to tell a long, complicated, involved story. It's more like you're giving people friends that they hang out with every day. I
And
think that has a lot of value too. It's the one thing I'm really sorry about leaving behind, not doing daily strips. And I have been doing comic strips my whole adult life. Before
yeah.
Phoebe, I was a web cartoonist for 10 years. So this is kind of the first period of my adult life that I'm not doing comic strips on that schedule.
Yeah, like at this point, how long would it have taken you? Would it usually take you to make one strip?
Varies so much. Like if the strip is just if I manage to write something that's just three panels, Marigold and Phoebe talking, maybe one of the panels is a close up on one of their faces, I could probably do that in less than an hour.
Okay.
Um, but of course, not all strips are like that. If there's a third character, if I've written something that requires action or more panels to execute, complicated backgrounds, crowd shots, or murder, I can spend an afternoon on one of those. So there's such variety. Sometimes when I was feeling the deadline pressure and wanted to get a bit ahead, I would write a week of strips designed to be easy to draw. Like here's a week where it's just the two protagonists talking. It would be boring if I did that all the time, but that was always available there. But then a lot of the time I'd find, oh, I've written myself the hardest possible thing to draw because that was the story that caught my imagination or whatever. So then I end up spending a lot more time on the dailies, and I did that to myself a lot.
Who's the easiest character to draw?
Marigold. Um, she doesn't seem like she should be because horses are famously something that cartoonists struggle to draw. But once you've got it, you've got it. And Marigold, I've drawn her thousands of times. She's all swoopy lines and stuff. Like even Phoebe, her hair is a bunch of lines and she has freckles and stuff. And I have to draw her outfit, and I have to keep her outfit consistent because unlike a lot of characters, she has more than one. Marigold is just Marigold. I can just sit down and draw her, and it's the same every time, and I've mastered it, and it's very satisfying.
And who's the hardest?
Oh, the hardest character to draw that I've drawn at any point in the strip?
Yeah. Let's go with that instead of yeah.
Yeah. Like of the regular characters that I draw, I guess the hardest one to draw, the one I always have to go back and look for references for is Todd the Candy Dragon
Okay.
because he's like in particular, I always forget how he's colored. Like, where does he have stripes? Are his wings all red, or is part of them white? There's little stuff like that that I always forget in because I draw him just infrequently enough not to memorize it.
Okay. That makes sense.
Um, in the entire history of Phoebe and Her Unicorn, Voltina the electric dragon. It's always dragons. Dragons are trouble. It's always Voltina because she has white outlines instead of black, and she has kind of a glow, and I have to draw that every time. And so, like, that's why she's never been in a daily strip. I don't even know how to begin drawing that in a daily strip. That's why she's only in the graphic novels and some Sundays.
Do you work do you work traditionally?
I work all digitally.
Okay.
I have for quite a while. I always say I was seduced by the undo function
Mm,
because I always felt that back in the day I used to be like, oh, traditional media, I'm with it forever. The feeling of a brush on a page. And that is great and everything, but as soon as I realized I was a way better artist if I could try something and undo it if it didn't work out, I was sort of hooked.
yeah, I can get that.
Also, art's not piling up in my house the way it used to.
Yeah. And also it's just quicker if it's a job. This is
Yeah.
not an endorsement for AI, people.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's quicker to cheat too. Like, quicker isn't automatically better, but all things being equal, quicker is something you seek out. And it can be quicker, although for me, I think it also just makes me more of a perfectionist. Like drawing on paper, there was always a lot of, his head's kind of too big in that panel. Oh well, and because it's done, you want to redraw the whole thing, and you kind of feel like there's a certain forgiveness that has to be allowed. Uh, but then you start working digital, and you can change anything at any time. So you go in and you nitpick yourself, and it costs you at least some of the time it saves.
Yeah. So you mentioned that so two of the books so far have been standalone graphic novels.
Yes,
Uh,
and I would love to make more.
how what is the difference here when creating the daily strips versus the standalone graphic novels?
The one
Uh,
thing I
yeah.
never like. Oh, sorry, sorry, I'm already off
No,
because
no, no,
I've
that's it.
done.
That's my question.
Yes. um, I guess as the guest, I'm more allowed to talk over the host than vice versa, huh? Hey, I never thought of it like that before.
That's true.
But the biggest difference for me is I've never outlined the stories in the strip. A lot of the time, I don't feel compelled to have them go anywhere. I can just sort of have the characters start, and whatever's funny, whatever's interesting to me, I can sort of wander from joke to joke. And if it's funny and doesn't last 6 months, people are pretty accepting of it because again, you're just sort of hanging out with the characters. With graphic novels, it's a story. I feel like it's got to have some structure to it. It has to be going someplace. There have to be certain elements. And so there's a lot more planning on the front end. You sit down and map it out. And strips are more like an unplanned meandering journey.
Okay. Is that true even with the strips that run long storylines?
I do plan this longer storylines in the strip out a little bit. Like um well, the final daily storyline in that story, Phoebe was moving to a new house. Phoebe's family's moving to a new house, and Phoebe's all, "Oh no, this is the end. Everything's gonna change." But the house isn't that far away, and like she doesn't even have to change schools. And eventually, she comes to accept that no, this is actually not as big a change as it seems. Obviously, this was a metaphor for the end of the dailies and the transition to graphic novels, because I feel like it is like that. Like it looks bigger than it is. I did plan that one out pretty extensively. Um, but even then it was like, here's what happens on week one, week two, week three, etc. And then the whole storyline was 10 weeks long. And I did that one or two other times. It's still kind of not, there isn't the same structure. There aren't the same structural requirements, I think, to telling a story that way. Because if it's a graphic novel, I'm not just going to go, all right, this happens, and then this, and then this, and then this. There sort of has to be a beginning, a middle, and an end. And um, I sort of think in terms of like three-act structure, which is something I never do in the strip. I do still think that writing a graphic novel to be a graphic novel as an entire book, beginning to end, um, there's a lot more structure to it that I want in place before I start.
Yeah. Do you so
If I end up writing a strip storyline in the strip and it runs short, it's like, oh well, I'll write another one. A book can't be too long or too short. You can't introduce something and then just pay it off in some other story later. Yeah, I don't know. Books are different. Books require more of you up front. I don't know that it's ultimately more work, but it's a different kind of work right as you're starting out.
given that, with the exception of the fact that at one point Phoebe had a birthday,
Hmm.
and some character dynamics have changed over the years, but like not so much. Given the nature of the graphic novels where you do have to have a storyline, do you foresee more character evolutions now that you've made the transition?
I think so, but I think any character evolutions that happen from this point are going to be either very subtle or huge because that's sort of the point of the book. Um, like when you're doing the strip every day and living with the characters over time, they evolve very naturally. And I think Phoebe and Marigold are kind of different characters than when I started out because I've been writing them every day or give or take for 13 years. Whereas in books, it's not that we're spending less time with them, but I think we're spending time with them in a more, they're not just naturally evolving. I keep coming back to the word structure. But like there's a structure to it. So any character growth that happens from here is more planned out.
Okay. And what are the challenges that you're foreseeing now as you move into long form
Well, for
storytelling?
one thing, I worry a lot that the daily deadlines were load bearing for me. I wonder if like because I have major ADHD brain. When I need to do something, the two options are immediately or never. And I do worry that like having to hand in at least a week worth of strips every week has a way of focusing the mind,
Mm-hmm.
whereas it's a little more nebulous when you have to hand in a book in 6 months.
Oh,
Um, and I do wonder how I'm going to do with that. My secret weapon is my spouse.
okay.
Um, my spouse worked in IT for a long time. Their most recent job was at UC Santa Barbara in the math department, running the computers there. But my spouse has left that career to be my full-time business manager slash assistant. Assistant to the unicorn is what their business cards say, which I put there. Uh, and My spouse is everything I'm not. They're a very organized person, a very organized thinker. My publisher already loves them because they answer emails promptly. Uh, we just did a book tour of 5 cities where we were appearing at bookstores in elementary schools. And having done tours by myself before, I can tell you it's a lot easier with somebody like that around to make sure you get where you're going at the times that you're supposed to go and that you have everything with you and you're ready. I felt sort of like I was flying a little bit blind in the past, and this time I didn't worry so much because somebody I knew was on top of it all was there with me. And I think writing is going to work kind of that way. We have a whiteboard here in the office with various deadlines for me that my spouse is keeping track of and will hold me to. I think just involving a second person who can do that kind of thinking better than me. My hope is, and I'm pretty confident that that is going to take the place of the old structure imposed by daily deadlines in terms of getting stuff done. And if it doesn't, I guess I'm screwed.
It would be like when you say you had to hand in the weekly strips. I mean, sorry, you had to hand in the daily strips on a weekly basis. Are you the type of person who would do maybe a couple of them at the start of the week and then all the rest of the five like at the end of the week?
It's more like the beginning of the week, I would do the writing and then take a day or two off to do something else and then sit down and do the art. Because I tend to write them in bursts of a week or if not more. I'll
Hmm.
just sit down because there are writing days. There are writing days and art days. And so the beginning of the week, I'll write everything out and then maybe gestate that for a day or two and then start on the artwork.
When is the first book scheduled to come out?
Well, the first post daily strip
Yeah,
book, not for a while probably, uh, because my contract still covers, and we have enough material for another like 3 books before we even get to the end of the strip, because the books are a couple of years behind the strips.
yeah.
So
So yeah,
the first one I would expect to be probably the fall 2026 book.
okay.
Um, or is that spring
So
27?
like,
One of those, unless my publisher wants to alternate and put one of the graphic novels out before that. I have no idea. We haven't talked about it.
does it matter?
I'll do it, however, because I am sort of itching to get to Unicorn Ghost Story. That's the story I've been kicking around for a long time that I wanted to be like my next graphic novel, and I've wanted to do it for years and not really had the time. So that would be the next one. 26 or 27, that'll be around.
Does it matter the order that it would come out in? Like, would would it matter if that came out after the collection of this last set of daily strips?
Depends what I put in it.
Okay.
Um, for instance, I can't like, not that I would, but I can't kill off a character who I knew was going to be alive in the strip finale.
Well, she moved houses.
That's true, she did. So it's a question of which house I draw,
Hmm.
assuming we draw her house. I have had
At all.
various thoughts about, because I feel like I never got Phoebe's house down particularly. I feel like it's had 2 different floor plans over the years and nobody's ever said anything. But the new house, I actually took some time and like drew it from a few angles and figured out basically where stuff is in the house. Phoebe's bedroom is on the second floor, facing the front, etc. Um, so I'll be drawing it a bit more consistently.
Hmm. I don't think you have the kind of fandom that would go on Reddit and be like, "Hey, look at how much this house doesn't make any sense."
Oh yeah. Not now. Maybe if any of them become YouTubers, I'll be seeing that in 10 years or something.
Or maybe like 30, given how long it took Seinfeld's house
That's true.
to
People
be.
have mapped out the Simpsons house before too.
Yeah. Okay. Um, so given your announcement, how have your readers been reacting?
There's been some um I'll miss seeing them every day for sure. I think the main reaction I've gotten is I look forward to what you do with the graphic novels. I feel like the people that are getting in touch with me are mostly excited about it. So I guess I got that to live up to.
No, nobody's reacted violently yet.
No, no one's threatened me. No one has threatened to change the name of their cat from Phoebe to Dana Sucks or anything like that.
You mentioned that the next book is going to be called Unicorn Ghost Story,
I don't know if that's the eventual title. It's the working title.
and it already from the working title alone, it already sounds like an exciting book. Can you
I've
tell?
wanted to do this for a while. I've had this idea for, I don't want to say a dark story because I don't even know if I'm capable of writing actually dark, but dark for this strip.
Uh-huh.
A little spookier, kind of. And I feel like I have leveled up a bit as an artist in the last few years. Like I don't want to be too hard on myself or too complacent about my artwork. I do feel like I'm always getting better. There's always things I could work on. And to me, that's part of the fun of being an artist. And I do feel like I've leveled up some on skills like coloring as uh as we've gone along. And of course, in the daily strip, I don't really get to stretch that.
Well, it's interesting because I think whenever I see any comic strip, from the very beginning, and then you kind of see how the particular art style evolves. And I always wonder, like, is that a matter of leveling up, or is that a matter of the cartoonist is has just found their style a little later on because you're not used to drawing these characters from the start.
That's a good question, and I think it's some of both. Well, like when I did Ozzy and Millie, I was 19 when I started drawing those characters, and I hadn't really done a lot of comic art before that. Like I had taken art classes prior to then, but mostly what I'd done was more like the kind of art you would learn in a classroom. Like I knew how to draw a face or a tree, but drawing cartoons I found to be a totally different beast with a steep learning curve. And so you look at the really early Ozzy and Millie stuff, and it just changes constantly. Like every few months, it's almost like a different drawing style. And even right up through to the end of Ozzy and Millie, the style only sort of stabilized. Characters would get taller, shorter eyes and noses and stuff would change sizes and shapes. Just my style was just sort of mutating over time. Makes it sort of weird. Like when I went back and put some of those old Ozzy and Millie strips together for books, because Andrews McMeel has released a couple of those collections. Um, I actually edited the art somewhat just to look less inconsistent.
Okay.
Because if you've got something from 2003 next to something from 2006, it's like two different artists drew it. Um, and so that was early on. When you get to Phoebe a few years later, it's evolved over that time, but not nearly as much. It's you can look at a strip from 10 years ago and a strip from now and say, yeah, that artist's way of drawing these characters evolved, but it's the same basic designs. It looks like I drew it. It happens more slowly now. But it does happen. And I think with Ozzy and Millie, there was a lot of sort of leveling up because I wasn't really used to doing that. I would learn new tricks and apply them. And with Phoebe, it's sort of more the other thing. It's sort of more, I don't know that I've gotten to be a vastly better artist in that time, only gradually better. I think it is just getting to know the characters and having drawn them a lot of times and learned what works within kind of the same designs I had at the very beginning.
Would you say, like, what would you say the legacy of Phoebe and Her Unicorn has been in, you know, so far?
Well, I like to
Um,
think it's early. Yeah, I like to think it's early to be talking about legacy. I hope that part of the legacy of Phoebe and Her Unicorn is bringing more girls into comics readership. Um, I feel like the idea that girls read comics is something every few years the media is like, hey, girls are reading comics now. And of course, girls have been reading comics for decades. Um, I do hope that there's something Bill Watterson once said. I've probably brought this up in in at least one of our other interviews, but he said after so many strips about boys, a strip about a girl drawn by a woman would be great to read. And I've always said I read that and thought, okay, challenge accepted. Um, what I hope I've gained for comics in doing that is shown girls that they can see themselves in the comic pages too. You know, I hope they look at Phoebe and at me and think this could be me. I've met a lot of little girls who I seem to have inspired to start drawing comics. That's a huge part of the legacy for me.
That's great. That's what I wanted to. That's really what my next question was going to be. Like, have you heard people saying like, "Oh, you're the reason I draw comics"?
Oh yeah, little girls at events and little boys. Um, I'd say 70-30 girls, but plenty of boys too, like to show me their comics. They will email them to me or write me letters, come up to me at events and show me. It seems like, and that was how I felt about my cartooning heroes when I was growing up, and getting to be part of that chain really means a lot to me. And the fact that so much of it is girls is exciting because I feel like we've only partly broken that glass ceiling. We're there, but we're still kind of establishing ourselves.
No, it's true because when I think back to the really big comic strips, of the last century, there have been comic strips with girls as the main characters, but they're all made by guys, like
Yeah.
like Nancy and Little Lulu.
And then of course Nancy got a makeover and was taken over by a female artist and got really great after that.
Yeah, it's
Olivia James is the best thing that ever happened at that strip. No, no offense to Ernie Bushmiller, but Olivia James's version is the one that grabbed me.
me too. So is that a confirmation? Olivia James is a woman?
I've never met Olivia James. I'm just assuming.
Okay. And then if there were comics written and drawn by a woman, it would be for adults, like Kathy.
Sure. And Kathy's great. Kathy was totally groundbreaking in its day, as I'm sure you're aware.
Yes.
Also, I mentioned earlier that one of the fun things about this job is meeting your comics heroes. I've met Kathy multiple times and she's great.
Oh, really? So she
Um,
still shows up to events and stuff?
yeah, she still shows up. It's the first time I met her, she got my autograph for her grandkid.
Oh, that's great. That's
Yeah, it's like,
awesome.
hi, I'm Kathy. Can I have your autograph? I'm like, oh my gosh, you're that Kathy. Ah,
So why do you think it took so long to have one for where the main character is a little girl written and drawn by a woman?
beats me. Why was that barrier still there for me to break when the strip started more than a decade ago? It's like the entire 1990s we didn't, and I guess there must have been some strips with female child leads drawn by women, right? What I'm sure I'm going to get angry emails about ones I'm failing to think of right now, but like that space seemed a lot more open than it should have been.
Between the
So
two of us, we read a lot of comics, and the
yeah,
fact that
one
we
of us
can't
should be
name
able to think of something.
the fact that we
And
can't name
I'm
one off
sure
the top of our
I'm
heads,
sure
right?
there is some important creator who does great work who I'm slighting right now. And to that person, I apologize for not thinking of you in the moment. But I'm sure that person would also agree it's not a terribly well trodden path.
Yeah. Yeah. So like the fact that it was still there for you to break, did you realize you were breaking it when you were breaking it?
I kind of set out to do that. Like I've referred to my strip before as Susie's Revenge because I always thought Susie Durkins in Calvin and Hobbes would make a great lead for a strip.
Mm,
She seems like a smart, interesting kid, but she's just there to be basically a foil to Calvin. And I felt like that was what Watterson was specifically encouraging someone to do. I did a piece for the Watterson tribute exhibit at the Cartoon Art Museum a few years ago, and I did a watercolor of Hobbes have and Calvin, or Hobbs is looking excited, Calvin is looking surly, and they're way in the background. And in the foreground, Susie, Marigold, and Phoebe are having a tea party.
Oh,
And I've
yeah,
always
yeah, I
thought of
remember
it kind
that.
of like I've thought of it that way from the beginning. What's the girl version of a boy and a tiger? It's a girl
Yeah.
and a unicorn.
Yeah,
Um, you are encouraged to think of Phoebe and Her Unicorn as in its way a feminist response to the comics of the past.
I I did discover Phoebe and Her Unicorn because some news site called it the girl version of Calvin and Hobbes. And when
Which
yeah, what,
I don't mind that description at all. I
yeah,
think if people want
what, when I sell it to people, I'm like, I'm not gonna say it's the girl version. Wait,
to,
I say like Phoebe and Her Unicorn is not girl of a girl version of Calvin and Hobbes. But if that's what it takes to get you to read it, that's what I'm gonna say.
sure, that's how I feel about it. If it gets people in the door. I mean, obviously it's its own thing. It's not Ms. Pac-Man. And by the way, Ms. Pac-Man is a better game.
Oh, is it? Isn't it the
Yeah,
same game?
it adds a bunch of stuff. I think it's
Okay.
basically the same game, but they added more than just the bow. It actually has more complex and more randomized gameplay than the original.
And so you mentioned Ozzy and Millie. So you were working on comics before Phoebe and Her Unicorn. So let's do this. Like before Phoebe and Her Unicorn and now, how do you think you have changed as an artist and as a storyteller?
Um, bef from the years before Phoebe to now, I do think that I have become much more comfortable with longer stories. That's one of the reasons for the current transition. That, like in the very beginning, there was kind of a rule that my stories couldn't go more than 2 weeks in the syndicated strip. The idea being that new readers are going to we want them to be able to just drop in. We don't want them to have to catch up on something complex and ongoing. I think that's generally a good rule early on in any strip. But for me, that was just fun because I didn't really have a lot of longer stories I wanted to tell. And as it's gone along, and as I've done stuff like Magic Storm, uh, I find that the stories that are sort of coming to me naturally are longer and a little more complicated. And that does feel like a big shift.
You mentioned other projects in your big announcement, and I know I have been saying Ozzy and Millie, but it is now Ozzy and Milo.
Ozy and Milo, yeah, that's a bit of an announcement. I it's not my first book that I'm going to do, but it is on the list somewhere that okay, so Ozy and Millie, for those who don't know, is my web strip. It stars two fox children, one of whom is very angry and destructive. That's Millie, and one of whom is very calm and zen, and that's Ozy. Kind of the irresistible force and the immovable object being best friends. And I drew it for years, and I am myself a transgender woman. And I drew Ozy and Millie just before and during the years that I was dealing with that. I transitioned about 20 years ago, so right in the middle of Ozy and Millie. And I've come to realize that because I was putting all of my discontent with the world into the character of Millie, all of the discontent that I resolved in my own life by transitioning, whether I meant to or not, and I want to stress I didn't mean to, I was basically writing a trans kid. I was giving that kid all of my trans feelings without even knowing I was doing that because in the beginning I hadn't identified them yet. And I had a dream a couple years ago that I wrote a story. I'm, sorry, I'm a mouthful of
Cricket,
cat. Um,
you had a dream.
I had a dream that I wrote a story in which Millie transitioned and wanted to be known as Milo. And I woke up thinking, huh, that's fun. And I drew some art of it, and the response was pretty powerful. People were into this. People were into this idea, and I was into it. And like this, I haven't had anything new to say about those characters in a long time, but this made sense. And it's like if I was going to pour all of my confused, frustrated, pre-transition feelings into this character, why not give him some resolution? And I actually have a story for like an Ozy and Milo book in my head too. It's not fully formed yet, but I've been kicking it around for over a year. And so that's a book that I will probably write at some point. My agent has been encouraging me, and usually I take her advice. She seems to know things.
It's a book to basically close Ozzy and Milo,
For
or
now, I mean, I could imagine it if people like it, and if I have other stories, I can imagine it being. I can imagine having a second book in that series. We'll see. And the book won't be just about Milo transitioning. That's because I think one thing I always want people to understand about being trans is it's not the most interesting thing about most of us.
Mhm.
Like Milo is still the kid he's always been, and he's going to have the same kind of adventures he's always had. And being freshly out of the closet as trans is just one small part of who he is.
Do you
I think
think that transitioning Milo will then naturally make Milo less angry?
I think definitely. There's an early Ozzy and Millie comic where Ozzy is meditating in the grass and very much at peace, and Millie walks up behind him and crashes a pair of cymbals. And I drew a comic more recently where Ozzy's doing that. And Milo walks up behind him with a pair of cymbals and then puts them down and sits down next to Ozzy and says, "I'm ready, teach me." Because that was my experience with transitioning, that I had a lot of bitterness at the world that is resolved now because of that. When you stop feeling like the universe has just played a big prank on you, it kind of frees you up
Hmm.
emotionally to let go of some things.
And your other projects, I think we talked about the graphic memoir you've been working on the
Yeah, I'm
first time we
finally
spoke.
finishing that. I've been working on it for almost 10 years. And it's been I've started over, depending on how you count, 4 to 5 times. And every time it's been like it was almost there. I've introduced and then abandoned framing devices. I've changed up the entire focus. I have changed drawing styles more than once. It turns out writing about yourself is hard.
Hmm.
It turns out making a definitive statement about any part of your own life is harder, at least for me, by quite a bit than writing about fictional characters whose narratives you fully control. Once I shared a cab with Mimi Pond, who who wrote the first episode of The Simpsons, among other things, and who had a fresh memoir out at the time. This was at Cartoon Crossroads Columbus in like 2017 or 18. And I was like, well, I'm working on a memoir. Do you have any advice? And she said to me, yeah, don't be afraid to lie. And I've been pondering what she meant ever since then. I ended up deciding that what she meant was just not to be too married to the truth. Um, the details of the truth, like you can combine events so that you don't have to introduce a whole new setting, just have one thing happen. You can combine characters rather than introduce whole new characters just to have them say one thing to you. Um, that's what I took from it. And that was something I really needed because I used to be a newspaper reporter.
Oh,
And part of
really?
I did right out of college. I worked as a reporter for a weekly newspaper in Washington for a while. And
Interesting.
one of the things you learn studying journalism is do not do any of that.
Yeah.
Don't change the truth. You don't decide, oh, this fact is unimportant, or I can fudge this. Like you are supposed to pledge undying fealty to the truth, and I want reporters to do that. But writing a memoir is different, and I kind of needed to get that into my head.
Yeah, it's your story. And even if you got what you think are the facts right, memory might be a bitch.
Yeah, you might write something in youth, 100% think you've been faithful to the truth, and then someone else who was there will be like, that's not how I remember it at all. And I think you have to understand reading a memoir that autobiography is a fundamentally self-serving act.
Yes, I get that.
It's one person's perspective, however honest it might be.
I so one thing that happens a lot to me is like I come up with a list of memories and I'm like, I put them in order and I think they're in the order that they're supposed to be in. And then I check the dates on when they happen. I was like, oh, that could not possibly have happened that way.
Yeah, this wasn't me, but I heard a story once about a history professor who made this point by having somebody read George Washington's actual letters and construct a timeline of a certain Revolutionary War event and then demonstrate that George Washington got it wrong. Like
It,
this is the guy from history telling you what happened in history and he remembers it wrong. Like there's no such thing as an objective source. Human memory is like that.
and you also mentioned a graphic novel with your sister.
Did I mention that last time? Yeah, we're still working on that. We're just about to the point of having something my agent can take out and maybe take to publishers soon. It's been it was slowed down a little bit by some real life things. Among other things, we moved from California back to Washington at the start of the year. And of course, I was distracted by stuff by having to finish up the strip and do stuff like book tours. But in spite of ourselves, we do almost have enough to maybe start shopping the book. And its working title is Project Super Sister. It's a sort of superhero mid-grade thing. Mom was a roboticist, dad was a geneticist, and they have a bet to see who can make the best superhero daughter. So we've got two sisters, one of whom is an android, the other of whom is a half cat genetic hybrid. And they're also just kids who have to go to school and stuff. And it's fun, and I hope people like it.
Is
And
it
it's great
different?
working with my sister because my sister's a really good artist, and she's really good at stuff like action in ways that I'm not.
Oh, you're not drawing it.
Oh, I am. We both are.
Oh, okay. How's that work?
We're still kind of figuring that out,
Oh, okay.
having two artists on a project. But when we've done stuff like this before, a lot of the time she pencils and then I tend to do finished inking and then we kind of divide the labor on colors.
Um, so mindful of the time, 10 years into Phoebe and Her Unicorn being in syndication. Again, Phoebe and Her Unicorn is no longer a daily strip. You are focusing on graphic novels, but you are still doing the Sunday strips.
I I kept the Sundays because I'm not quite ready to stop being a syndicated cartoonist yet. It was my dream when I was growing up, and I want to hold on to that part of it at least. Plus, Sundays are fun to draw.
Right. And do you think also from an audience awareness perspective, it's just best to kind of keep a regular thing out there?
I think so. I think keeping yourself in front of people is important. I don't think it's as important for me as it used to be, just because I'm a lot more established than I used to be.
Mhm.
And a lot of my audience seems to have no trouble waiting 6 months for the next book without even being aware sometimes that the strip exists, that it's anything other than a book series. But I do think it's good to keep stuff out there. And the other thing is they haven't given me the Reuben for newspaper strip yet, and I want to at least leave that door open a crack.
I remember because you've been in newspapers for you did Phoebe and Her Unicorn for 10 years, and I remember one year where you posted that everyone nominated for Reuben for best newspaper strip was a man, and then
Every winner in every category was a
every
man.
winner in every category, and then that slowly changed over the years, didn't it?
That kind of made me mad at the time. And then the following year was a lot more diverse. And I feel like there is a concentrated effort that I may have contributed to in my small way by yelling a lot. I want to think that was useful. I don't know, but they're doing a better job now than in years past. There is an effort on the part of the NCS because comics have gotten much more diverse. Oh, the percentage of creators who are just straight white men is so much lower than it used to be, and I feel like the awards need to reflect that.
And yet, and yet, people, those are still the biggest chunk of cartoonists.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Things Dana shouldn't say. I feel when I go to NCS meetings, I feel like the I often feel like one of the younger people there, which is a strange feeling because I'm in my 40s.
No, yeah, I think most because I think most newspaper strips lean towards legacy strips that have been around for a very long
Yeah,
time.
yeah. And then I'll go to like uh other kinds of events. Like you go to a comic convention and stuff, and the hall's just full of young female or non-white or queer creators. It's the contrast is interesting. And I think the NCS is trying to make itself more like they've made steps. I feel like the honorees have been more diverse. I feel like they've done a good job of better job than they used to of recruiting a more diverse membership.
I think what would be pretty cool is you mentioned that kids come up to you saying that you're the reason they make comics, but when I look back at something like Calvin and Hobbes and I see a strip like yours, a strip like I don't know, Stefan Past is a strip, or just all of these other strips, none of those strips are alike, and it would be really cool to see Phoebe and Her Unicorn influence a bunch of new strips with a variety of styles and tones and
Absolutely.
efforts.
And I'm certain that I've left at least that much of a mark because I've already got kids telling me that I inspired them to start making comics. And what are those kids going to be making in 10 years? It's going to be amazing.
Do you have any that have made you go like, "Holy crap"?
Um, no, only because I can't imagine what that would be. Like I have seen plenty that are like, "How old are you?" Okay, that's so much better than I was doing at that age. Like you're doing stuff at 13 that like I would have been proud of at 20. I've
Uh,
seen some of that, but I guess it doesn't surprise me because I'm from the internet.
yeah.
And as far back as the 90s, I remember being on art archives and looking at stuff and being like, wow, I could learn so much from that artist. Oh, they're 12. Uh, like there are amazing artists at almost every age.
And sometimes it just requires the right motivation.
Yeah, sometimes you just have to see a like queer lady cartoonist come to your school and say, "This is what I do and this is how I do it," and you think, "Oh, well, then maybe I could do it." That's my mission.
So let's close off with this. Given all of that, if somebody is aspiring for a career in comics, what advice would you give them?
The advice I would give anybody aspiring to a career in comics is just draw from your heart and don't quit. It sounds like such a graduation speaker thing to say, but it's absolutely true that if you try to figure out what other people want, you're never going to figure it out because they don't know.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of people quit maybe not that long before they would have built something really special. You never really know. I'm not necessarily the most talented cartoonist. I'm just one of the ones that didn't quit.
I, that's the thing with going from your heart, because nobody knows what the audience really wants, even the audience. If the
Yeah.
audience knew what it wanted, then it would be very easy to make
My
more things.
yeah, but look how many companies who would pay billions of dollars to just know what it is people want. Companies that make movies and other forms of entertainment, if there were a formula for just giving people what they wanted, they would all pay through the nose to get it. It doesn't exist because people don't really know what they want. People know what they've liked in the past, but that's not the
Right.
same thing. And the other thing I always say about that is that people, none of us are aliens. We're human beings painting with the same basic emotional palette, and there are certain experiences that are basic to being human, or at least very widespread to being human. And anything you're thinking, feeling, anything you've experienced that you think is interesting, someone else out there agrees. There's so many of us. Just a matter of sticking around long enough for those people to find you.
Dana Simpson, thank you so much. Congratulations on 10 full years of daily strips for Phoebe and Her Unicorn. We can't wait for the books.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.